Without tooting my own horn too much, I know that the vast majority of you see me as a peak, alpha male specimen that is destined to deliver quality BM to the opposition. But you know, I wasn't always that incredibly good at my job. In fact, I was a wimp before I discovered anchor arms. Point being, as much as the power of editing allows me to make myself look an order of magnitude more competent than I actually am, sometimes I'm definitely struggling to get the bread. And while I am very aware of the practice that is missing your shots on purpose to give the enemies a false sense of security, not every such moment concludes with a happy end. Just like everyone else playing this game, I can go hours and even days without a satisfactory match, and all of that thanks to the power of matchmaking RNG. Now granted, I can't always default to blaming Jeff. I'm willing to admit that every so often I am getting a great idea during a match, but then the execution kind of, how do I say that, falls flat. But who even cares about a lack of mechanical skill and one's inability of identifying surfable rooftops anyway? If there's one thing I assume you took away from my stories, it is probably the fact that confidence, above all else, is the key factor to competing in Overwatch. Just like on our last episode, we had returned to Hollywood for another unique round of quick play in which not everything turned out to be how it seemed. While some would describe our Hammond's gameplay as hard-inting, others have exposed the hamster for the socio-political genius that he actually is. Looking back at that replay, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be angry or impressed. Either way, it inspired me to give a unique twist to my gameplay as well. Much like Lincoln manipulated the enemy team into eventually activating his trap card, I decided to put even more emphasis on psychological warfare as well. Gone are the days of affected positioning only because the enemy team decided to play Doomfist. It is time to take the fight to the flankers, because the best way to deal with your oppressor is by showing them that ultimately they have no power over you doing. And while some of you may think that just eliminating somebody followed by a teabag is enough to get into their head, I would argue that it is important for you to adjust your BM according to who you are facing. Of course, I could just eliminate that Genji at any point in time, but it is so much more satisfying to wait for him to try and go for a health pack just to be denied the privilege of healing at the very last second.
I need healing.
In my attempts of becoming more manipulative while playing, I have stuck to even dignify my enemies by granting them as much as a glance when I eliminate them. Of course, I expected my streak of dominance to continue, but I quickly found myself humbled during one faithful round. Our story today brings us back to King's Row. Listen, if I could do nothing but play King's Row all day, then Jeff knows I would do so. And subsequently, I'd be perfectly fine with every single episode taking place on this map. But because it is the best map in the game, you automatically just win simply by getting it, which means that the objective becomes of secondary concern, and instead, the entire game revolves around establishing dominance. And you can tell that especially Reinhardt players are very excited about that. As such, the enemy team made its way out of spawn to test the durability of our defenses. But the first engagement was about as uneventful as it gets. Everyone tried to figure out where the others land on the spectrum of available testosterone levels, poking each other to see who is going to buckle under the pressure first. While a couple eliminations have been traded back and forth, neither side was ready to full send it down mid, which is like literally every round of Overwatch ever. With 38% and counting, I was already itching to find out who would be the recipient of what is obviously going to turn into a solo grab. And as such, I appreciated the enemy Reinhardt's contribution to my ultimate charge. But nothing screams dominance more than trying to hammer down a tank as Torbjorn, prompting Humak to go on the offensive. Unfortunately, the collective healing of the enemy Ana and Baptiste allowed Zarya to avoid such embarrassment, with my Torbjorn barely getting away with his life thanks to my bubble. Since our Reinhardt just bit the dust in an attempt of punishing the enemy Zarya for overextending, we found ourselves with a severe lack of protection, allowing the enemies to freely push onto the objective. A nano boost would expedite the acquisition of the BM search, and surprisingly enough, I was on the menu today. While I appreciated their Reinhardt trying to give me a hug, I had to insist he adheres to social distancing by using my ultimate. However, that didn't stop him from dropping his hammer on the rest of my team anyway. CQC and I made a valiant effort to make up for our team's deficit, but the enemies really meant serious business here. The opposing supports were pumping so much healing into their Reinhardt that I had a hard time believing he would pass a doping test. No summer games for you, buckaroo. While I survived for a surprisingly long time, all that struggling would only delay the inevitable, and at last, we had to surrender the objective. But if you think that we got no more aces up our sleeves, then I've got a surprise for you. The objective may be lost, but we still had a secret weapon hidden behind enemy lines. Zeus, being the enemy Ashe, had been the only player that heard Humak sneaking about trying to find the spy and eliminate them. What they didn't expect was that our Torbjorn knew how to fend for himself, while Ashe players notoriously have to beg for pocket mercies. As such, our dwarf would come out victorious. While half our team had still been in the process of returning to the front line, Humak continued to make the enemy spawn his home, clearly aiming to further establish his dominance. But all good things have to come to an end, and and this time Zeus would successfully avenge the loss of their masculinity. Naturally, the only thing more manly than petty revenge could only be solo ulting that subscribe button. Back on the objective, what followed was a firework of ultimate abilities, turning the next teamfight into a mosh pit more than anything else. Amidst the chaos, Raiden had been going for a rather bold flank, obtaining numerous eliminations in the process. But a single Widowmaker can only do so much on the card, and eventually, and ironically, they would be sniped by a fire strike. At this point, it was obvious to me that something drastic had to happen. It's not like the enemy team was better than mine, despite what you may say about our Torbjorn. The main difference came down to our levels of confidence. Right now, the opposition is very certain of their victory, and it is in moments like these that they are the most susceptible. All I had to do was target the weakest link on their team with a power move, take out the player that has contributed the least, and challenge them to a BM duel. Once their cohesion is broken, victory will be ours. Since it seemed like the enemy Zarya got tired of chasing me around the backline and the enemy soldier was running into my arms, I figured I had found a suitable victim in that very moment. Wasn't it for their stupid Zarya to show up with a freaking bubble? I don't want to hear any of it, okay? My team had been in full desperation mode at this point, trying to stop the card right before they could reach a second point. With my Reinhardt being the only frontline player currently available, he would be the recipient of every single support cooldown at our disposal, and frankly, he did a pretty good job considering he was the only source of damage on our side. And as much as we all hoped for his overwhelming Chad aura to be enough for us to stabilize, without any way of contesting the high ground, our backline would fall like dominoes, eventually resulting in a second point cap. Now listen, some of you guys are gonna sit there thinking, 6 minutes left on the clock with a throwing Torbjorn, there's no way you're going to win. And you would be right. But that only applies when you rationally assess our current situation. And there's no place for rational thoughts when testosterone levels rise to the heavens and the most coherent call-out you can put together is go card. Not to mention that our Widowmaker is actually pretty good, and the last point on King's Row offers less opportunities for them to be flanked. Either way, we're not here to strategize, and heck, we're not even here to win. Our goal is to establish our position at the top of the food chain, even if that position is nowhere near the objective. Crucially, I had to build up another graph so that I can solo ult nice aimbot again, but this time, I would be the one who bags. Don't get the wrong idea, it may look like I'm fighting for the objective, but in reality, it is just the most convenient way of obtaining my ultimate. And while I was on the losing side of my own battle for dominance, the two Reinhardt players, so far anyway, have been fairly even when it comes to beating the pulp out of one another. Meaning that rather than having this be a battle of mental fortitude, Sniff My Gravy, I swear I'm not being paid enough to say these names out loud, decided to throw away their shadow to show how much they don't need it. God, they're so freaking manly. Despite that incredible display of confidence, their frontline would be dismantled, sending the remaining survivors packing. But there was no time to lose, and not to be discouraged by one lousy elimination, the enemy Reinhardt returned and, in typical alpha male fashion, decided to run it down mid, leading to the elimination of both main tanks to kick off the next engagement. I was now left as the cornerstone of our defensive lineup when in actuality, all I wanted to do was get my ultimate to solo graph nice aimbot. But before I even had a chance to gather my thoughts, Zeus decided to send their reinforcements into our backline, giving them a numerical advantage. Thankfully, Bob has been programmed to be about as intelligent as your average DPS player, meaning that CQC had no trouble taking him out. Upon his return, Magic Ghost made use of our amplification matrix to easily obtain a double kill before nonchalantly walking towards his Reinhardt counterpart ready to get back at him. But as per usual, the Red Reinhardt was not afraid to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of making a point, and as such, he once again made sure that none of them would get to play the video game. Honestly, I couldn't help but respect what this man was doing. Finally, both of the teams had decided to stop running at each other to take a break from the madness and catch their breath. This has been a crazy round so far already, and it was far from over. We had endured the red team's relentless attacks for so long, and we weren't planning to give up now. After all, I was yet to be granted the satisfaction of a vengeful solo ult. At this point, the red team had realized that their success hinged upon the support they could provide to their alpha Chad of a main tank, meaning that as they approached the front line, he would be granted their undivided attention. In this very moment, I was left with a difficult choice to make. Do I take the gamble and hope that my team would survive the onslaught of a fully supported WM1 Reinhardt so that I can keep my Graviton switch to BM nice aimbot, or do I invest my ultimate to make sure that Sniff My Gravy cannot just tear through my team? Honestly, it was a bit of a non-choice after all. Nice aimbot has been a coward all game long, always hugging his healers in the backline to be sure he can't be caught on his own, so the chance of me solo ulting him if we cannot survive that fight was slim to none. As such, I invested my Graviton switch to keep their main tank at bay and tried my hardest to keep Magic Ghost alive when the enemy Zarya decided to do the same thing to him. Right about now I got the slight feeling that my Reinhardt had been suffering the psychological effects of the opposition's dominance, as he was much more reluctant to swing away at the enemies. To make sure his confidence does not crumble even more, I made an effort to focus down the disc of invulnerability and take out the main tank. If we still want to win this match, and I had to find a way to allow Magicos to obtain a level of badassery that could match the enemies. But the red team would not waste any time, and before I even had a chance to support Magicos, I had already found him flattened by the enemy Reinhardt. Without our main tank, the best defense would be a strong offense, so our Baptiste dropped down his amplification matrix in an attempt of poking the opposition into retreating. But the red Reinhardt had no intention of giving up. Instead of waiting out the duration of CQC's ultimate, he went on a massive flank. A flank that I'm pretty sure caught all of us by surprise when he subjected Magicos to yet another shatter. If there was one thing that got shattered at this point in time, it must have been his will to fight. Even though Humak was trying to come in clutch with a supporting DPS, the fact that the enemy main tank had no respect for our Reinhardt despite him being nano boosted must have taken a toll on his decision making. I mean, can you even blame him? He was getting schooled by a guy called Sniff My Gravy in a battle of dominance. But even though we lost our main tank, the spawn advantage allowed us to eventually stabilize. And before we knew it, it was time for the grand finale. The enemy team spent 2 minutes to build up an ultimate bank, and now they could make use of overtime mechanics in a final attempt of assaulting the objective. I had to invest all of my available resources to try and keep Magicos from quitting the game, and Nice Aimbot continued to be a coward that tried to avoid his rightful punishment. With 30 seconds left on the clock and my ultimate just having been used, my hopes of finishing this game with one final BM grew more and more distant. Even if it means losing the objective, my only hope was an extended overtime that forced Nice Aimbot to get on the card, so that I have enough time to build up another Graviton Surge while also being in a position where I can actually use it against him. And just when I thought that Jeff was fresh out of miracles, the enemy Winston jumped into our team using Primal Rage. Where many of you see but an angry monkey, for me, that massive healthful was a godsend that allowed me to further recharge my ultimate. Overtime started ticking down and I was already halfway through to getting another graph, but just as I grew hopeful, I saw Nice Aimbot being taken out. This is it, the end of my dream. All enemies had been eliminated before the card got near the finish line. When overtime expired and the screen read victory, I could not help but feel like I had failed. Not only did I allow the enemy Reinhardt to walk all over my own main tank, I also never got a chance to get back at my nemesis. As such, to me anyway, this match was a massive failure. I'll get you next time, Nice Aimbot. I'll get you next time. The end. Hey, thanks for watching today's episode, and apology for taking so long to make them. I appreciate each and every one of you who stick around and wait for another video. If you enjoy watching them, then do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out, consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely hit that bell icon to not miss out on the next episode. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Peace.